Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new series I'm calling... At the time of recording this, I actually still don't have a name for the series, but it has to now because you're watching it, right? I'll just let future Zach, who's editing this, pick a name for the series, and hopefully by then he has something, because right now he don't. So anyway, welcome to the new series in which we're going to be talking about how to build a skateboard from start to finish. I'll be going into as much detail as possible, so at the end of the series, hopefully you'll have enough confidence to build your own board. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about probably the most obvious skateboard part, the big old honking piece of wood that you stand on, the skateboard deck, or sometimes it's called the board. As we go through this video, there's one word I want you to keep in mind: preference. Picking out your perfect skateboard deck is going to be different than me picking out my perfect skateboard deck. It's really a trial and error kind of thing. I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again here. I rode a 7.5-inch skateboard for years, and the reason I did that was because I thought, oh, I'm shorter, which means I have to use a smaller board. And after riding around on a few of my friends' boards, I decided I was gonna actually jump up to a 7.75-inch board. And now I realize that 7.75 is actually a lot better size for me just because it's a little bit bigger. And honestly, I'm considering even jumping up to an 8-inch board next. But the point of the story is you may start off using one size skateboard, and then over time you might switch to a different size skateboard. It's a preference. You may not get the perfect skateboard for you on your first try, and that's okay. And don't be afraid to try to switch it up and try out new things. If you have a friend that skateboards, borrow their board for a little bit and see what kind of things you like and dislike about their setup. But don't criticize their setup, because like I said, it's a preference, so what they want to ride is going to be different than what you want to ride. There is no right or wrong answer. There are dozens of different sizes and shapes of skateboards, and when you start doing your research to find the board for you, you might get a little overwhelmed. But don't worry, I'm here to help you out and guide you through that process. So, let's get you a board. First things first, I want to talk to you about skateboard deck anatomy. And I know what you're thinking, Zach, that is just a piece of wood. How many different sections can it have? Well, you're about to be surprised. Let me show you. First, let me show you the nose and the tail, or the front and the back of the skateboard deck. In most cases, you can just simply look at the graphic to decide the nose and the tail, but it's not always that easy. Another way to tell is usually the nose is going to be steeper than the tail of the board. And the tail is lower to the ground because it's easier for quick popping when you're trying to do ollies and other tricks. However, in some cases, like this board, it's still a little hard to tell just by looking at it which side is the nose and the tail. But like I said, luckily we have the graphic here to kind of help us point us in the right direction. When we get to a future video about grip tape and building the whole setup once you got everything, I'll talk about an easy way so you can remember which way is the nose and tail. But for now, it's not super important. Just understand that the nose is the front of the board and the tail is the back. So from there, we have the width of the board and the length of the board. When people say their skateboard sizes, they're usually talking about the width of the board. So for example, if you came up to me and asked what kind of skateboard size I ride, I would say 7.75. I wouldn't say 7.75 by 31, blah, 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 blah. We're skateboarders, we're not engineers, we don't need to get into the specifics. So next we have the rail of the board, or just the side of the skateboard right here. Speaking of the side of the skateboard, you'll also see the ply, which is the wood that is pressed together to make a full skateboard. Most skateboards you see will say that they're 7-ply, which just basically means that 7 pieces of wood were pressed together. I have seen some 8-ply boards, but most of the time it's 7. Next on the board we have the concaves, which are these slopes on the board. This allows for better control as well as better quality popping when you're doing ollies and all that fun kind of jazz. There are a few different concave styles, but the most common one is what you see here, which is just a standard radial concave. The other common type of concave that you'll see is having, well, no concave, and you'll typically only see those in longboards and cruisers, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. And finally, we have the mounting holes or bolt holes. As you can probably guess, this is where your trucks are going to attach to your skateboard. And of course, every skateboard deck will have mounting holes on the nose of the board as well as the tail of the board. And so that's the basic anatomy of a skateboard deck. And like I told you, it's a lot more than you probably would have thought. But don't get overwhelmed. Even though I just went through a bunch of different skateboard terms, I promise there's only a few things you need to keep in mind when you're buying a skateboard deck. Like for example, shape. Wink. That means we're about to transition. Before you even buy a skateboard, you have to ask yourself, why do I want a skateboard? Do you want to use it to kind of just cruise around and have fun with your friends? Do you want to use it as a way of transportation? Or do you want to learn some tricks on it? These types of questions will determine what kind of skateboard you should get. If you're wanting to get a skateboard and use it as a way of transportation, you're probably going to want to get either a longboard or a cruiser. Longboards aren't made for tricks, but they are used for travel. They have bigger wheels on them typically, which allow them to get over cracks and dirt and rocks and whatever's in the path on the way to your destination. Cruiser boards can be used for doing tricks, but a majority of the time they are also used for just travel. They're typically a little bit smaller though, so they're a little easier to store. Cruiser boards are very interesting because there's a ton of different sizes and shapes. Some have tails on them to make it easier to hop off curbs. Others are wider for some reason, and some are shaped like this. And I know it's in the name, but typically a cruiser board is used for just that, cruising. Cruiser boards are great if you just want to ride around with some friends or maybe take it to the skate park and just go up and down some obstacles, but you're not really interested in doing a bunch of different tricks. I've been wanting a cruiser board for a while, mainly just to kind of ride around the neighborhood and, you know, just listen to some tunes and just kind of cruise, but I just haven't broken down and bought one yet. And now it's starting to get cold, so maybe next spring I'll do that. And when that time does come, I'll be sure to make a video to show you the process I went through to pick out my cruiser board. So now let's talk about penny boards, and in my own personal opinion, that doesn't affect anyone else, I don't really see why you would get a penny board if you could get a cruiser or a longboard instead. Sure, they may be smaller and therefore easier to store in a locker or a backpack, but they're also probably the most dangerous of the board shapes. And that's because the faster you start going on them, the harder they are to control. One time I was using my friend's penny board and we were just kind of cruising around having fun. I picked up a little too much speed and I almost ate the cement pretty hard. But luckily there was a little bit of grass that I was able to hop off onto. But not having that feeling of control when I was riding that penny board was very scary and very dangerous. So if you really want a penny board, go for it, I guess. But I'd really recommend getting a cruiser or a longboard instead. But if you have to get a penny board, just keep in mind that hills and speed are your worst enemies. And finally, let's talk about the skateboard, which is probably the main reason you are watching this video. Obviously with the skateboard, you can use it as a way of transportation or just to use to cruise with your friends, but you can also do tricks with the skateboard. Skateboard wheels are typically smaller than longboard wheels or cruiser wheels, so they take a lot more power to get going, especially if you're on some kind of rough cement. Seriously, if you're using a skateboard as a way of transportation and you have to go on rough cement, it ruins some of the fun of skateboarding. The neighborhood I live in, they use literally the worst cement I've ever seen in my life. And so it's never even fun to just kind of cruise around because it's like more work than it's worth it. Anyway, enough about the terrible cement and the stupid troubles in my life. The biggest difference between a skateboard and the other boards we talked about is that a skateboard will always have a nose and a tail, and is typically in the standard popsicle shape. There are a few different skateboard shapes, but for a beginner, the popsicle deck is probably going to be what you want to go with. And of course, they're the easiest to find because they are the most common, so you almost have to go out of your way to find a different shape skateboard. So now you know all the different types of skateboard shapes and their functionality. And again, it all comes down to what you want to do with the skateboard. Now, even though I talked about cruisers and longboards and penny boards, for the remainder of this video, we're gonna be talking about just the standard skateboard. Mainly because I only have a standard skateboard. So for the remainder of the video, I'm gonna assume that you also went with a standard skateboard. So I'm sorry in advance for all the people that are more into longboards or cruiser boards. Dang, right? Besides skateboard shape, there's probably one other thing you'll notice when you start looking at skateboards: the sizes. Skateboards range in a variety of sizes. I've seen boards as small as 7 inches and as big as like 9 inches. So first off, why does skateboard size even matter? Well, there's actually 2 reasons. Number 1, if you're a shorter person and you're using a huge board, you're gonna have to exert more power to get the board off the ground. And number 2 is gonna be the spin of the board. If you're using a bigger board, it's gonna take more time to spin all the way around. If you're using a smaller board, it's gonna spin really quick. However, using a bigger board can be good because you'll have more space to land on after the board is done flipping. So essentially, the bigger the board, the longer it's gonna take to rotate in the air, but you will have more space to land on. So for a smaller board, it will spin faster, but you'll have less space to land on. So that's why the main thing to consider when you're looking at skateboard sizes is your height. However, I'm gonna sound like a broken record again. This is all a preference. You can be 4'1" and use a 9-inch board if that's what you're comfortable with and that's what you like. However, if you have no clue where to start, I'd recommend matching your height with a skateboard size. I'm not gonna run through every single different height and every single different possibility because let's be honest, we both have things to do. So here's my rule of thumb. If you're 5'3" or taller, I would recommend using any size board from 7.75 to 9-inch. The closer you are to that 5'3" marker, the smaller board you should get. I'm actually exactly 5'3", and like I said earlier, I ride a 7.75 and it's perfect for me. So feel free to use me as that kind of reference. If you're right between like 5'3" and 5'6", I'd recommend going with like a 7.75, maybe an 8-inch board. If you're feeling a little bit wilder, you can go a little bit bigger, but please keep in mind, these are very small increments we're talking about. At the end of the day, it doesn't make that big of a difference. If you're taller than 5'6", I'd recommend going with a deck size between like 8 inches and 8.5 inches. But again, these are very, very small differences, and trust me, you'll be fine either way. Skateboard size does matter, but it's not the end of the world if you get a slightly bigger board or a slightly smaller board. You can always adjust with your next deck setup. So you picked a skateboard and you picked what size you want to ride, and then you start seeing all these brands and you're like, wait, how can I tell if any of these brands are even good? Well, first off, let me tell you a little secret. Pretty much all the good skateboard companies make their boards the exact same way. Obviously, if you can go into a local skate shop, all the boards that they're gonna have there are gonna be great quality. But depending on when you're watching this video, it may not be easy right now to just run into a skate shop and buy a board. So you will have to turn to an online shop. Again, as long as it's a trustworthy skate shop, you can pretty much buy any brand off their website and you'll be good to go. So for example, let's look at tactics.com. I've bought tons of stuff from them before and I know they're trustworthy and I know that all the stuff they sell is good quality, so pretty much any of the brands in this category would be good for me to pick. Of course, if you don't find anything you like there, you can always check out other trustworthy skate shops. Some that I like are CCS, Daddy Skate Shop, and SkateWarehouse.com. So just spend some time looking at those different websites and you will start to see a lot of the same brands show up across the board. And that's another way you can tell if a brand is good quality, when you start seeing them on 50 different websites. When it comes to buying a skateboard online, I pretty much have just two recommendations. The first is do not buy a skateboard off Amazon. I don't care how many 5-star reviews a board has, I can almost guarantee you that it's probably a parent reviewing that board and they just bought it for their kid and their kid is happy with it, so that means it's good as gold. And it's not good as gold, it's bad as poop. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that buy skateboards off Amazon don't know the difference between a good quality board and a bad quality board, so their reviews don't really mean anything. My other big recommendation is please don't buy a board from Walmart, Target, or any of those other big retailers. The reason is these boards are cheap, they break easy, and that can be very dangerous. So to sum it all up, my recommendation would be find the skateboard size you want and then go to a trustworthy skateboard shop and look for that size and just find a design that you like. Again, I can't say this enough, but as long as you're buying from a trustworthy skate shop, you will be fine, trust me. I've bought dozens of boards over my years and I've used tons of different brands, and I can tell you they're all pretty much the same dang thing, minus the different designs. And if you are buying from a trustworthy shop and you want to save a little extra cash, you can always buy what I call a shop deck. These decks are built with the same high quality of any other skateboard brand, but they actually just have the shop's logo or their own design on them, and for that reason they sell them a little bit cheaper. For example, I bought this Tactics one a while back, and I also have this thank you board here, which is a little bit typically more expensive, and I can tell you just by holding them that they are pretty much exactly the same. In fact, if I close my eyes and try to tell which one is which, the only reason I know that this one is a Tactics one is because it has grip tape on it and this one has plastic wrapping over it, but honestly, they feel exactly the same. So to sum all that up, just buy from a trustworthy skate shop and you'll be good as gravy. That's something people say apparently. So that was just a very in-depth look about a skateboard deck. I hope that answered any questions you may have about buying a skateboard deck. And I hope you join me for the next episode where we will talk about the trucks of a skateboard. And if you like this video or at least found it enjoyable or interesting, if you could do me a huge favor and hit that like button and maybe even consider subscribing apparently. Another new word for us. I also just recently opened an online skate shop, and right now we only have grip tape and stickers available, but if you want to check that out, please click that link in the description down below. And of course, if you have any additional questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer as many as possible. And as always, have fun, good luck, and keep shredding the gnar.